Ladies and gentlemen, a very special guest tonight. We have Dr. Paul Cottrell. He is joining us from New York City tonight. For those of you that don't know who Paul Cottrell is, he has a YouTube channel. We're going to share the links below. He is a prolific author who shares most of his writings through Kindle, so you can get them quite cheap. He's a researcher mostly in chaos theory. This is what he got his PhD in. His interests are in modeling financial markets. He's now recently going for, I believe, a degree in biology at Harvard, but he'll cue us in on that. And he is especially interested in this current novel coronavirus outbreak. He was on Leak Project the other night with Leah and Rex and I, and he has been prolifically posting on the nature of this virus, the type of outbreak, and even we're going to be speculating tonight on some numbers based on the Spanish flu. It's a pleasure to have you, Paul. And before we get started, did you hear that Ohio health officials have possibly are investigating 2 new cases? Welcome to the show, Paul.
Hi. It's great to be with your show, and I really appreciate you trying to promote my channel. And I just wanted to add that, yes, I am working on a master's degree at Harvard. It's in biology, focused. My thesis is more focused on cancer research, but that I do have a PhD in finance, dealing with financial markets and chaos theory. But in regards to this particular health issue with the coronavirus, the Ohio outbreak is just more confirmation that we're starting to see more spread in developed nations. This is not just a situation that's going to be in China, but it's all over the world. We're starting to hear even cases in Japan. There was just recently a confirmed case where it was a bus driver that was driving individuals from Tokyo to Osaka. And those individuals in the bus happened to be from China. They were just visiting. And this is proof positive that you do not have to be near Wuhan to catch this virus, that you can have transmission that where it's dormant between individuals that have the virus, and it could spread to the general population. Well, this is a concern. This is a big concern.
Let me go over some of the updates today that I have uncovered, and you can either confirm or deny them perhaps for us. And so what I have heard is that, well, first of all, what I can confirm is that the CDC has raised the travel alert level, and that was from level 2 to level 3, which means that even the CDC is agreeing that this is becoming a travel problem. Now, additionally, exactly what you said, there are cases popping up worldwide and all over. We have cases now popping up in Germany as well as Ohio and Japan. And David Dubine just sent me a voice message saying that they are shutting ports down from north to south in China. And there's even some borders that are being shut down in Kyrgyzstan and even Mongolia. And I think you confirmed that. Isn't that correct, Paul?
Yes, that's the right. It's not just Mongolia, but also Tibet, which is surprising because they're trying to control Tibet. They're because so. But what is interesting about what's going on is that it's countries that are shutting their border to China. It's not China shutting their border to those countries. So China is kind of like becoming closed. There's a noose going around it. And what is kind of interesting about the politics of this is that it may actually question the legitimacy of the regime. So there's a geopolitical dynamic, not just a contagion dynamic taking place here. There is a belief system within the Communist Party and within the Chinese, astrology concepts of rule that if there's legitimacy of rule through heaven. But if there is plague, or if there's a lot of bad things that happen, then it questions the legitimacy of the rule from heaven. So within just the psyche of the Chinese people, this actually, they may look at, well, maybe the regime is too dictatorial to Hong Kong. Maybe the regime is, there's cracks in the system is the main point that I'm making here.
Yeah.
But to get back to the biological aspects of it, yes, these borders are being shut down to try to slow the contagion, but there's data that will show here that it might be too late, and we're going to start seeing outbreaks that are in other countries. Maybe not as bad as in China, but we're probably going to start seeing outbreaks. And these outbreaks in China didn't really start to show until just recently, within the last 5 or 6 days. But
so here's the
there's
scenario.
a lot of evidence.
Here's the scenario I think that went on, and you and I talked about this earlier, that there was actually, coming from the actual medical professionals within China, they were trying to get the word out weeks ago. And from what we've learned in the last 48 hours is that this virus has a gestation period of averaging 10 days from 1 to 14. So if they delayed a week or two in warning the public, this could, and now we know that it spreads through eye mucus. So these masks are essentially useless if you're going to touch someone and rub your eye. And they've raised the travel alert. So there was, when the people in China find this out, will they revolt against the system? Because ultimately it's the government and the regime that's going to be responsible for their delayed reaction and the deaths of tens of thousands, maybe millions. And we're about to go over the numbers. So let's just talk on that point real quick.
Okay. So the B&O data is showing just under 6,000 cases that are confirmed worldwide, and about I think it's 132 that have died from this. Now this here is showing the Johns Hopkins data, but the data that I just quoted was from the B&O data, which is a little bit more updated.
Yeah, so now what I'm getting from the inside and from confirmed by David Dubine over at Adapt 2030, who is in this area right now, he and his girlfriend were just traveling back and having extreme difficulty, to say the least, traveling. Not only that, there's problems with getting food supplies and just moving around in general, and they're getting out of Dodge, as many people are. They're just driving away or flying anywhere out of that region, which I believe is a good thing. But as far as the numbers being reported, he is telling me that the numbers are much higher, approaching 80,000 cases in China alone. And probably more like they're just much higher. And you were telling me that based on your mathematical modeling, that it's probably 10 times higher. Do you want to go over those numbers?
Right. There are researchers in Hong Kong that are modeling previous outbreaks from the past, like SARS and Spanish swine flu and all that. And they are suggesting that the numbers that are reported are about 10 times less than what they are. So that roughly means that we have about 60,000 individuals that are confirmed with the disease, and about 1,300 that have died from the disease. Now, their prediction is that there's going to be a doubling of the infection of about 6.2 days. So every 6.2 days, you're going to get a doubling. So if we assume a base of 40,000 for week 0, then the first week will be 10 weeks or so. So it is predicted in their model that by the end of this month, first week of February or so, we should have about 160,000 cases. By the beginning of March, we should have about 2.6 million cases confirmed. And by the beginning of April, we should have about 41 million. And if we assume a death rate of about 3 to 5%, it's quite a lot of individuals that pass from this virus. Now, epidemiological curves from the Spanish flu of 1918 show that there was a spike of infection and death about a month and a half or so, maybe 2 months, and then it rises up, and then it starts to abate, and then there's some waves of infection shortly after it. That a secondary wave and a tertiary wave that happens. Sometimes these waves with these pandemics get worse. Sometimes they don't. So, but usually most of these types of situations, they attenuate, they get weaker, they adapt to the human body, and it's not as infectious. It's when you get this new jump or a really major change in the virus where they really create havoc within the society. But I suspect that by the beginning of April, we'll start seeing numbers that are in the millions, around 40 million or so.
Yeah, what's really
infected worldwide.
Troubling for me when I'm looking at the stats right now is the fact that there are more deaths than people that are recovered. Now, granted, this is the early onset of the viral outbreak. But if you look at the slope of the total confirmed cases, it appeared to be maybe dropping off or reducing in curve. It's not based on these new numbers. It's in fact, almost vertical, which is like any major pandemic outbreak, where that vertical line continues to stay at that angle and just rapidly increasing from thousands to tens of thousands to millions. But the recovered rate is so low right now, it's very troubling, and hopefully that number starts to come up as time progresses. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, there's the incubation, issue that's going on with, anywhere from 1 to 14 days. I think there's also an issue because most of this problem is in China. There is this idea of self-heal with herbs and stuff like this. So there's a lot of underreporting. It may not necessarily be as, a governmental nefarious underreporting. But if you look at the videos of all these hospitals, they're packed. And there's no way, even just a small percentage in China, if you assume, let's say 20% of the people that are in the ward waiting to have a bed have the virus, these numbers are much higher than what is being reported. So it's kind of hard to, assume contagious differentials based on the data that we have. But if we assume that they're okay, that they're legit, it is concerning. Diseases are like a chaotic system, and when you have these chaotic systems, it's hard to predict. They can get out of control really easily, or you might have a spike of volatility, if you want to use market terms, financial market terms, where there's heteroscedasticness in data, where there's a spike and then it goes back down to normality. I don't think that that's the case right now. I think that we're going to continue to see more cases, and the first differential of this curve, which is the slope that measures the velocity of things, is going to continue to increase. If you do the second derivative of the curve, then you get acceleration of the contagion. But I am concerned. But it unfortunately we just don't have enough data to really say for sure if this is a super bug, if you want to call it that or not. But sometimes you have to look at multiple data points. It's not just what is being reported in terms of who has the infection and who's dying. It's also looking at pictures and videos and reports on the ground, like you're saying, with individuals on the ground and what they're doing. These are all data points to state that this is probably more infectious than what the WHO is saying or the CDC is saying. There was just a report late last night, early this morning, stating that the health organizations originally stated that this virus was moderate, that they put it under a moderate category. And then they stated, oh, that was a mistake. Not the change based on data, but there was a mistake that it is now considered high risk. Okay. Now, if that was true, if what they're saying is true, that they accidentally said it was moderate risk and then reclassified it to high risk, I question the competency of these health organizations, because this is
You froze
very
up there,
strong problem in society. This is a very strong problem in society. So you would think that the health organizations would get it right when they write their news briefs that between moderate risk to high risk. It's really sad that they can't get their act together.
I really think that they dropped the ball on this one.
They're hiding something.
Yeah, I think they dropped the ball on this one. I think it's much more virulent than anyone thought. They didn't have any expertise or knowledge on this, and they waited too long. And then once they found out the gestation period, there were thousands of people all over the place that already had it. And it took over a week before people got sick, and it was too late. And I still think it's too late. The slope of this curve and the data that's coming out in the last few days, and the reason you and I even have met and have now done multiple podcasts together, is testimony enough to what's going on. Now, where do we go from here? Leah wants to come on the show, and we want to dive deeper into the subject. Do we wait 24 hours? Do we wait 48 hours? In your estimation, based on your knowledge, what is the tipping point where the WHO will declare a national emergency? When does that happen? When we hit 1,000 deaths and 100,000 people infected? How does it work?
I don't think it's going to be based on what's happening in China, unfortunately. I think it's going to be based on what is happening in Europe and in the United States. If we start seeing an outbreak in the United States or in Europe, then they're going to go in super crisis mode. Now, super crisis mode means lockdown of large cities. They have this stance. I think it's to actually calm the financial markets, personally, but and I have a reason for that I'd like to bring up later. But they don't want to create panic in terms of the financial markets in the United States and in Europe. And they're just going to wait until that there is an outbreak, and they're hoping that their current screening protocol will be sufficient. But I don't believe that it will be. I think that the world is too connected to really stop something this large.
So do they freeze the markets, Paul? I mean, how would it work if we quarantine all major cities in the US?
Well, you know what's it? Yeah, well, let's kind of like step back. Right after we need to look at we actually have to look at the oil market. I think the oil market was actually strengthening when we had the issue with Iran. Once the issue with Iran started to abate, the oil market started to sell off a little bit. Now, if the stories,
The gremlins are getting you. You're starting to freeze up a little.
Yeah. All right. So, So I'll try to repeat myself. So in China, the infection started in December. We started having our issues with Iran early this year. All right. The oil market started to sell off right after we decided not to bomb Iran. All right. The oil markets, the oil markets, the people that play the big money, they know what's going on. They know a lot of things that are going on. This event leaks out as a contagious event during Davos, right after there's a sell-off in the oil market. I personally think that there is a signal that's going out there to investment managers to position themselves, to give them a chance to either get out of a position, to be able to reverse a position for a big event. That there's a signal. There's a signal in the news that's saying, okay, prepare for something. Okay, now what is that signal? Well, I'm seeing selling in the oil market, and I'm seeing strengthening for the last month and a half in bond yields. Strengthening meaning the bond prices are strengthening, so the bond yields are going down. So people want to buy bonds. So this is signaling a potential reversal in the stock market. So to answer, so that's kind of like the backdrop, the early backdrop of this. The contagion starting, and these investors are trying to get into a situation where they can reposition themselves. Then the outbreak hits, and they start to shut society down. When society starts to shut down, then you're going to have economic issues. You're going to have just-in-time problems. You're going to have plants starting to shut down because the material isn't being shipped to those plants. Commerce will start to falter, and you're going to start seeing a lower GDP, not just domestic, not just domestic product, but global issues. So you have the GDP globally and the local GDP. I think that we're going to start seeing a sell-off in the market. This is what's kind of strange is that this is a global event. And the ones that want to maintain globalism may take this as an opportunity.
You think they will?
In the world that try to sell off the market to actually push out the president and say, and create. I'm talking about the president of the United States here. That is a reason. Well, the market's bad, and most people vote based on their wallet. So it adds to the probability that, well, maybe he'd be voted out of office. Now, maybe not. I don't know. But whenever you change the New World Order and you go antithetical to what the New World Order wants, they seem to have a way of rearing its head somewhere. Brexit is happening, officially in 2 or 3 days. Davos just happened. We just, we didn't, bomb the Middle East like the neocons thought we would. It's very suspicious to me that all of this stuff is happening at the same time. The probability of the next big the next big Spanish flu-like pandemic happens right around when Brexit happens. And it so happens to happen right around the third time we've ever impeached a president. And it happens, you see what I'm saying? So there's too many things aligning geopolitically to think that this is just a just a random event.
So where do we go from here? The globalists may take control of the event, and they're certainly going to use it to their advantage to make money, because even if they have to close borders, people are going to make money on that. What happens when they
Right. I mean, it's almost like a signal to let.
Do they shut down and freeze the markets, or is there some kind of limited trading?
Well, they may put short sale limits. You can't do a short sale on a stock. There's probably going to be FDI outflow restrictions, meaning that you can't pull certain funds out of a country. There's probably going to be bank holidays. Historically, every time banks are stressed, they go on holiday, which is a code word that they don't have any liquidity. They're insolvent. They're afraid of a bank run. So we might see that. You might start seeing problems in the commercial paper market that we were talking about last night, and in the bond market. It's interesting. Hedge fund managers are putting more money into the bond market, and that's usually a sign of risk, not a sign of risk taking. For me, I look at what's happening with the yen, the Japanese yen. If you see the Japanese yen strengthen, okay, when it's compared to it was trading last night, I think, at about 108. But if you start seeing like 100 or below 100, that is a major fear factor in the markets. And you typically start seeing American government treasuries purchased, the selling of the market, and you start seeing the VIX start to go up, the VIX index, that's the volatility index of the S&P 500. But for the average person, what they're going to start seeing is the potentiality of layoffs, the potentiality of having issues with getting money out of an ATM instead of, maybe you can only, take out $50 out of an ATM, maybe nothing. There's going to be capital restrictions of what you can withdraw from a fund. We're at low yields when it comes to the central bank. So when you have that, there's not a lot of room for the central banks to do stimulus. And we move towards negative interest rates. So if you have a savings account and you move into negative interest rates, they're taking money out of your account. It's called a bail-in. So normally if you have an account, you get money, you get some interest, right? Well, every month or whatever, you would be giving the bank money because it's negative interest rates. Now there are mechanisms that the Federal Reserve could do to purchase different types of assets. But then you're starting to move into a more socialistic society where they're actually buying stocks and trying to calm the market down. Normally they do repo. In the repo market, they basically buy treasuries, government treasuries, and then through that purchase, they give the bank that needs the money coming out of the Federal Reserve, they give those banks the money that they need. And then once the bank does their thing, they give that money back to the Federal Reserve, and then the Federal Reserve gives them back their security, which was the treasuries. So there's going to be a lot of funny business that goes on. But individuals, when there's a lockdown, it's going to be harder to get food and supplies and stuff like that. So it's prudent to have a few weeks of food and supplies that you need. I don't think this is going to be a zombie apocalypse. There's no historical evidence of Dawn of the Dead or anything like that. But even the Black Death. The Black Plague came and went. And, and
You're freezing up again there.
more, oh, that's interesting. But after the Black Plague, there was a positive outlook. There was, there was less tyranny from the aristocracy. The peasants had more freedom. They were able to get land, and they were able to have more prosperity. So, I do think though that this event,
this one, Paul.
well, there's a lot of differences too, but I do think based on what was simulated with Event 201 by Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation and Bloomberg Foundation, that it's interesting because the Wuhan data that you have on the screen is coming from Johns Hopkins. Johns Hopkins was the major beneficiary of Bloomberg's health initiative out of his philanthropy fund. So, there's a connection between Johns Hopkins, Bloomberg, and the Event 201. But in that little simulation that they did that people can look up on YouTube and watch, they kind of did this like role play of a bunch of board members. How would the world be configured, or how would the world be managed through a coronavirus infection? And they did this in mid-October of 2019, and the infection started in China in December 1st. So another data point that this doesn't seem like this was just coincidence, that we're kind of being conditioned, or what Noam Chomsky would say is there's a manufactured consensus in the media. They try to program us to think that we need a solution to a problem that they created. So I am concerned about that. There seems to be too much of a coincidence of this Event 201 and the event that's really taking place in Wuhan. And I think the main conclusion that came out of that Event 201 was a more top-down governmental control of the population for the sake of safety. It's always for the sake of safety. Just like after 9/11, the Patriot Act came out, and it was for the sake of safety. We spend trillions of dollars since 9/11, independent of the war in the Middle East, but just trillions of dollars for surveillance to try to prevent terrorism to take place. But in a free society, we need to kind of think it's better to live free in danger.
I agree. And they're chopping in on you again.
But, that's perspective on, I think we're being conditioned for a new world order top-down initiative, and it's being sneaked in, via some sort of biological vector.
Yeah, so let's go over it, and let's wrap the podcast up. And we will be speaking with you shortly. There is reason to be concerned. It is highly suspicious. The numbers that we're currently getting by Johns Hopkins are directly connected to a revolving door of globalist elites. Who knows what they're actually telling us here? It's highly suspicious in that there is a biological lab in Wuhan where this coronavirus may have emerged from. Accidentally, someone chucked it out the window. Who knows? But the governments in China definitely waited too long to sound the alarm, even though medical professionals were. We are at pre-pandemic stage. It's anyone's guess what the real numbers are, but we know that this is highly contagious. We don't have all the facts. And if it does hit first world countries like the US and Europe, there will be panic. Panic buying at the stores, people trying to withdraw their money and tape their windows shut. I don't know where it goes from here. Do you have any closing words? And we're going to see you tomorrow or the next day to follow up on this. And where would you like us to go when we talk again? It's been a pleasure talking with you, Paul.
Well, thank you. I appreciate this. Well, obviously, we're going to, want to, watch the data and see how it evolves. But I do believe that sooner than later, we're going to start seeing outbreaks in the United States and in Europe. And that is going to confirm the mathematical models that are coming out of Hong Kong. So we need to really watch that, because when that takes place, that will be the catalyst of some of the suggested programming that was in Event 201. And, we're going to, I live in New York. I live in Manhattan. So it's very, I don't feel safe, honestly. And it's very easy to control the island, through some military, means. So, but once we start getting about 20 confirmed cases in New York, in the 5 boroughs, like Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, Manhattan, and they start locking down, it'll be very interesting in how the society accepts it. I don't think that just because of the mindset of an American, I don't think we're going to take lockdown or quarantine very lightly, like the Chinese. And your
video froze up. You were saying the U.S. aren't going to take it lightly.
I don't think the people will take it lightly. So having connections with people like you and Rex, if there is a lockdown in New York, or let's say Chicago, or even LA, and having people on the ground explaining what is exactly going on, this is going to be another data point to show people around the world of a potential global means of control. I'm worried about just the contagion part of the virus, but there is a new world order component to this that is very real. People can read about Agenda 21 and Agenda 30, and they're concerned about populations and stuff like this. So, we have to watch for the outbreak. If there's no outbreak, that's great. That means that there's low deaths. People don't get sick, and then we just have our nice life. And I hope that happens. But if the outbreak does happen like it's predicted, then what is the next move by governments? And I think we're already hearing it in the news that, well, when there is an outbreak, then you start losing your rights, civil liberties, and possible, forced vaccinations. And that's going to open up a whole can of worms with people of being forced vaccinated.
Yeah, that's exactly where we're going. New world order, forced vaccinations. The globalists couldn't get the climate change narrative going. Davos has failed, and so they need something else. This is going to be mandated. Guys, go check out Dr. Paul Cottrell, his books over on Amazon. There'll be links below, but it's free just to subscribe to his YouTube channel, where you can watch all of his content, where he talks at length about all the subjects we talked about tonight. It's been a pleasure, Dr. Paul. We're going to be talking to you in a day or two. Have a great night.
Thank you. Good night.